Hey, Dominique, can you hear?
Hey, how are you?
Not bad.
You made it.
Well, you know, my dog just started a barking fit outside, so I just have to run off and bring him in, lock him up.
Yeah. So I assume your understanding of French is as it was 15 years ago. No, you understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand most of it, but that was the last time I really had any conversation. So I would imagine if I was speaking in French, it would take me a long time to express myself. You know, probably need more than the 2 hours.
No, but express is on a different level. But just understanding, I guess.
Yeah.
Still be different. It's like me with Ukrainian. I need to get back to Ukraine, the active Ukrainian to.
Yeah, I used to live in Germany, you know, many years ago when I worked for Radio Liberty, and I took intensive German classes during that time, and I was actually reasonably good. But now I wouldn't trust myself at all, you know, even to try, other than very basic conversation.
Yeah, you need to be in the juice, basically, so to hear the language, to be in a situation.
Yeah. Hey, while you're here, what is the deadline to register for ASN? I've not done it yet, but I need to do it, I think.
Oh, well, technically it was yesterday, but it's okay. I mean, we're so late. We're so late anyway because of the war in Ukraine. Everything is delayed. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if you could
everything is. Yeah, I'll do it right away today. The thing is that everything has to go through it. Our university is such a mess because we restructured everything, and now everything has to go through certain people who I never know. You know, there's nobody in the office or anything like that.
So I talked to Clément yesterday, and we agreed, he may have told you that already, that it's going to be like conversational. Instead of asking us to do presentation, he's going to ask us questions back and forth. It would be more interesting, more dynamic. A bit like
that's what he was doing.
A bit like the McGill event. It was like we're here to.
And it's on the future, right? Not the past. So
I think he wants us to say a few things about the past first, how we got there. And then we'll focus on the future.
Yeah.
Immediate future.
I'm actually working on my lecture tomorrow. My class is on independent Russia this term. So actually, the last class was looking at Russian response to the Euromaidan, and we're getting very close to the present. So they're really interested.
Yeah, it's I suppose it's close to the end of the semester, right?
Yeah,
end of March, early April. Right. We're going to Nantes. I've never been to Nantes. It'll be my first virtual visit.
Yeah. Well, I know Yuliya SHYMKO, right? We worked together for quite a long time in Belarus.
Okay.
And even in Siberia, we spent a summer in Siberia together. So, but I haven't seen it for a few years now.
Yeah.
We seem to be the only one here.
I know. Not exactly sure what's going on, but let's wait. Because I did do the test just half an hour ago. I know you did it yourself. So I emailed her. Because with the audience, we didn't have the PowerPoint, we had a shot of the actual stage with the. You saw that, right? Half an hour ago when you did the sound test.
I didn't see anything half an hour ago. Nothing at all.
Oh, it's because when I did the test, I could see the journalist, like Clément, on stage, and it was.
Oh, okay.
But I guess they have a little delay.
Well, if it was Ukraine, it would be 20-minute delay, but I think in France, maybe it's a little more efficient.
So they're going to ask us about the negotiations.
Yeah, I mean.
Hey, I'm anything but optimistic, man.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too, because I don't think Putin is very serious.
He's not serious at all. And we're way past the question of whether Ukraine should be officially a member of NATO or not. And we're way past that. And that's not the issue, really, because we already know the answer. Everybody knows the answer. Ukraine is not part of NATO. It should be pretty clear by now.
Yeah.
And the security guarantees, well, that's it. The Ukrainians seem to think that it's going to be like as if we were a member of NATO. That kind of security guarantees, I don't think that's going to happen either.
No.
Either you're in or you're out. It's the whole in-between situation that needs to be.
Yeah. And if you look at the countries who are being brought forward as guarantors, none of them are really what you call great military powers. You know, they're just not substantial enough, I think, to dissuade Russia from doing this again in the future. And I was saying to Clément that we probably need China involved at some point.
We will begin in a few minutes. Okay. There seems to be a little delay here. I don't know if you got the same message that I just got on Teams.
Yeah, I just got it, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Clément LESORT, journalist, and very delighted to be here with you on Tuesday, March 29, as a part to this conference in order and dedicated to shed light on the particularly dramatic and hard situation that Ukraine is going through for months and actually and probably for a long time, and also for the consequences for the neighboring countries too. I think about the eastern countries, and also for European Union, and as well as we can easily understand for the consequences on the balance and the security and for the peace in all over the world. So we're going to have a discussion with my special guest this afternoon, Yuliya SHYMKO. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. And those gentlemen behind me, R.MARPLES and Dominique AREL in remote, far from here, but they really wanted to be with us this afternoon. So. As first and as an introduction, let me introduce the general manager, the Dean School, Christophe Germain. Hello, Christophe. Thank you very much for being with us too. You wanted to be here to open this conversation, this conference, and maybe you could tell us why and how it's important for a school like Audencia to organize that kind of conference and to talk about the Ukraine situation today.
Thanks, Clément. Thanks, Clément, for your introduction. Good evening, everyone. I would have preferred not to introduce this roundtable or to introduce a roundtable with a different topic. I will not recall the reason why we have planned this event today. Everybody knows about the suffering caused by the war in Ukraine for the Ukrainian population. Audencia has expressed 2 weeks ago his full support to the Ukrainian people, to all those who are suffering today because this conflict, as well as to the members of our community, students, alumni, colleagues, professors, partners who are affected by this tragedy. And we have partners in Ukraine, especially with the University of Kiev. As an international school, because Audencia is an international school, we are a sample of the world. And our mission is to train, to educate, and to welcome students from all over the world by defending the values of humanity, democracy, and respect for others. Because these values are the basis for bringing people together and for peace and solidarity. It's our role for that to propose moments of discussion and learning, and it is the aim of this event this evening. I give now the floor to Clément for the presentation of the roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christophe Jamin, Dean School. You can applaud him, I mean, and all his team to organize that kind of event. Thank you very much indeed, Christophe. Yeah, yes, let me introduce our special guest. I told you about them, and Yuliya SHYMKO. Let me present you. You are a professor at Audencia in Department of Organization Studies and Ethics. And I have to mention that you are Belarusian, and therefore you know very well this area we're going to be talking about, I mean, this afternoon. David Marple, thank you for being with us. You are a distinguished university professor at the Department of History, Classics and Religion at the University of Alberta in Canada, and also research fellow for the Contemporary Ukraine program at the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. And let me mention your last publication. It's a book which named The War in Ukraine's Donbass, Origins, Context and the Future. It was just, published in January 2022 with the Central European University by the Central University Press. And Dominique AREL, thank you for being with us too. You are an associate professor at political science and holder of the chair of Ukrainian studies at the University of Ottawa in Canada too, of course. And I will mention too your last publication. It's a book which named Ukraine's Unnamed War, and it's co-written with Jesse Driscoll from University of San Diego, and it will be published in August. So Dominique, we can begin with you if you don't mind. You prefer me to speak in French or in English, Dominique? Je peux parler français si vous voulez, Dominique. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Il n'a pas son micro ouvert.
Ok, Dominique, il faudrait que vous ouvriez votre micro.
Ouais, voilà.
Ok, parfait. Dominique, on va commencer en français avec vous, et puis on parlera anglais avec Yuliya et David. Dominique, justement considérant ce que j'expliquais et en vous présentant, peut-être qu'on peut commencer avec vous, parce que j'aimerais qu'on s'attarde sur cette question de la nationalité, du sentiment de nationalité et national en Ukraine. C'est quelque chose qui est particulièrement discuté et contesté, notamment par Moscou et Poutine, pour ne pas le nommer. Est-ce que c'est réel, ce sentiment national ukrainien, ou c'est, comme le prétend Moscou, si j'ose dire, une fiction européenne?
Oui, ben, je pense que la guerre, s'il fallait une démonstration, la guerre qui a commencé depuis un mois nous l'a démontré de façon assez saisissante, sinon spectaculaire, la force du sentiment national ukrainien. Et quand on dit sentiment national ukrainien, c'est pas nécessairement d'un point de vue ethnique, mais sentiment d'appartenance à la nation ukrainienne, au sens français du terme, nation ukrainienne, et à l'État ukrainien. On le voit depuis un mois, et l'armée russe en fait le rencontre sur le terrain. Mais laissez-moi faire 2 points ici. La représentation russe, certainement celle du président Poutine, puisqu'il a été très explicite sur la question, et même hier, il y a un projet de loi qui a été déposé au Parlement russe, à la Douma, qui dit essentiellement que les russophones, c'est-à-dire ceux qui maîtrisent la langue russe, sont les compatriotes, en guillemets, de la Russie. Donc, du point de vue russe, du point de vue de Poutine, si vous parlez russe, vous êtes un membre de cet univers, de ce monde russe. Il y a même l'expression officielle, Russki Mir, le monde russe. Et donc, vous n'êtes pas vraiment ukrainien, vous êtes russe. Ce qui explique pourquoi, ouvertement, depuis Maïdan, en fait, depuis 2014, enfin, ça remonte à plus loin historiquement, mais c'était un casus belli, là, avec l'intervention militaire de 2014 en Crimée et dans le Donbass. La remise en question même des frontières territoriales de l'Ukraine, que toutes les régions au sud et à l'est où les gens parlent russe, etc., ne sont pas vraiment ukrainiennes, ont été, entre guillemets, données par les bolcheviks. Tout ça, c'est artificiel, l'État ukrainien n'est pas réel. Alors ça, c'est le discours. Et la réalité, ben, c'est de plus en plus, l'intervention militaire actuelle, évidemment, est à la grandeur de l'État. Mais c'est cette situation, finalement, de partition. Donc, la Russie demande à l'Ukraine de reconnaître sa propre partition territoriale. Quelle est la réalité démographique et politique en Ukraine? Là, je vous ai parlé de la représentation russe et puis d'une espèce de légitimité des opérations militaires. Depuis 2014, mais là, évidemment, c'est passé à un tout autre niveau, là, depuis février 22. La réalité, c'est que vous avez en Ukraine une situation qui est sociologiquement bilingue, au sens où à peu près tout le monde comprend les 2 langues et les parle jusqu'à un certain point. Mais il y a une partie de la population assez importante, particulièrement concentrée dans précisément les provinces du Sud et de l'Est, qui préfèrent parler russe. On parle beaucoup de Mariupol, la ville martyre, là, depuis un mois. Mariupol est massivement russophone. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire russophone dans le contexte ukrainien? C'est que les gens préfèrent parler russe, mais ils parlent aussi ukrainien, ils le comprennent très certainement, et ils n'ont aucune hostilité face à la langue ukrainienne. Mais ils préfèrent parler russe, donc ça en fait des russophones, alors qu'il y a une bonne partie de la population qui préfère parler ukrainien, donc on les appelle des ukrainophones. Le président Zelensky lui-même vient de l'Est et vient d'une province qui s'appelle maintenant Dnipro. C'est une province qui avait un nom plus compliqué pour des Occidentaux à prononcer avant Maïdan, Dnipropetrovsk. Là, c'est simplement Dnipro, qui est une province qui jouxte, donc qui est voisine du Donbass. Il a grandi, donc c'est une province à majorité russophone, mais à très forte majorité ukrainienne au sens ethnique. mais il a grandi comme un russophone. C'est sa première langue. Depuis qu'il est président, il ne parle russe que dans des situations où il s'adresse directement à un auditoire de Russie. Alors, il est devenu ukrainophone pour des raisons politiques, c'est sa nouvelle identité, mais il a grandi comme russophone.
Dominique,
déjà, on l'avait vu en 2014, mais maintenant en 2022, c'est très, très clair. Le fait que les gens préfèrent parler russophone à Kharkiv, à Mariupol, Audencia, Mykolaiv, Kherson, la liste est très longue. On a entendu parler de villes qui sont occupées maintenant, Melitopol, n'a rien à voir avec une soi-disant loyauté au monde russe ou à l'État russe. Personne parmi les russophones ne peut accepter une invasion militaire et puis le bombardement de leur propre ville. Ça, je pourrais y revenir, Clément, plus tard si vous voulez. Mais la guerre, depuis le début, les bombardements de terreur dans les villes ukrainiennes, c'est les villes précisément russophones de l'Ukraine de l'Est, de toute l'absurdité criminelle de la guerre. Alors, cette représentation russe, lorsqu'on regarde finalement la nouvelle réalité sur le terrain, elle disparaît.
Merci Dominique pour cette première intervention. David and Yuliya, I hope you understand what Dominic said about the Russian language. But David, what about the Russian language spoken? I mean, in Ukraine, for many of Ukrainian people, is it an influence for Russian? I mean, to have some power and to legitimate their invasion in this country? David?
I don't see why that would be the case to justify an invasion. The Russian language has been spoken in Ukraine for a long time, and if you look back to the 2014 uprising, Euromaidan, or Revolution of Dignity, when the movement there became more militant, when so-called radicals came into the square, these were Russian-speaking radicals from the right sector. They were not from Western Ukraine. They were not Ukrainian speakers. It really, I think the language issue has not made any difference to Ukrainian politics in the 30 years of independence. It's rather been perceptions of who they are and what their past is and maybe what their future will be as well. You do have a divide in Ukraine. The divide in elections has moved around from election to election, but you could say roughly the Western speaking parts, Western Ukraine, cities like Lviv and Ternopil have looked more towards Europe, whereas the eastern part, particularly the Donbass, but the eastern part has been Russian speaking and perhaps looked more toward Russia for their influence. But I found that as time went on, the elections became more and more national, and more Russian-speaking Ukrainians embraced the national idea of Ukraine. And not only that, also the pro-European ideas of Ukraine and democracy. And today, of course, you have a Russian-speaking Jewish president who has now become perhaps the most popular president that Ukraine has ever had. It doesn't really make a significant difference. The most, you would say, nationalistic president Ukraine has had is perhaps Viktor Yushchenko between 2005 and the end of 2009. He became the most unpopular president Ukraine has ever had. His standing by the end of his presidency was about 1.5% of the electorate. So I would say that the ethnic issue has been exaggerated and it's been exploited by Russia in order to justify the invasion and this terrible carnage that has been caused by it.
Well, maybe yeah, David, you're still here? You're still connected?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, okay, thank you. Yuliya, what was the basis, I mean, for the idea that Ukraine is not the separated nation? I mean, what are the Vladimir Putin arguments about that war?
Hi, David. Hi, nice to see you. We haven't seen each other for a while.
Yeah.
something that you have to understand, and I remember if I go back to 2000 when Putin was brought in power. So he was never elected, as you know. Nobody would have expected that this is going to take a turn like this. Of course, there were a lot of concerns about the growing influence of FSB, ex-KGB, but at that time, the basic preoccupation was that there was some kind of a cleansing of the elites, of the Russian elites. The old oligarchs had to go, the ones associated with the team of Yeltsin, and they would have to be replaced with the new ones that would allow the new elites to stay in power and enrich themselves and basically continue the model of this state capitalism and the extreme corruption. What started happening is, I think, again, I don't have these can be the allegations, but there was a kind of a change of influence in the close circles of Putin, the more nationalistic influence, so somebody who was called a so-called philosopher, Dugin, so Russian nationalism, very kind of a weird understanding of Russian role in the world that was more and more was resembling this project of the restoration of the USSR on the one hand. So famously Putin called the collapse of the USSR the biggest geopolitical tragedy, but then it was coupled with some kind of obsession with the restoration of the Russian Empire. So the restoration of the Russian Empire that would imply restoring some kind of form of military glory as well. So, and here you have this weird fusion between nostalgia for the USSR, nostalgia that had very clear geopolitical pronouncements, so the balance of fear, the balance of terror, the rising expenses and basically militarization of Russia that started taking place in the last 15 years, with all this new ideological narrative and discourse about the reestablishment of the past glory, so its own national mythology, its special mission. So there is a kind of a messianic statements that you hear right now. So it is almost at the level of Huntington's Clash of Civilizations, right? So a complete radical opposition of everything that Putin ended up seeing and the West representing. And Ukraine, of course, has a huge symbolic power for the Russian collective imagination, because this is how Russia became Orthodox. So a growing influence on religious discourse, on these justifications as well, because this is how Russia got baptized, right? So this is why Kiev is very much referred to as the mother of all the Russian big cities. So basically without Ukraine, you wouldn't have Russia in its current cultural and religious representation. So this is why the latest discourse is basically, okay, this was always, if you know a little bit of history, it's called Kievskaya Rus, so Russia of Kiev. So this is why, according to Putin, there was never Ukraine. So it was all from the very beginning something very Russian. So, this is just right now the main narrative, the main discourse that is being offered as the nourishment for the Russian population 24/7. So yesterday they closed the last independent newspaper, Novaya Gazeta, that just received the Nobel Prize, and this is what people are being told. So we are here on the, it's not, I mean, sometimes I see this kind of a misrepresentation, this is a local conflict. No, it's not a local conflict. In the discourses of the major Russian political figures, this has been presented literally as the clash of civilizations. So I'm not really exaggerating. David, you can correct me if I'm wrong. No.
David.
No, I would agree with that. It seems to be reaching that kind of epochal level between the two sides. And Ukraine actually is not philosophizing at all. You don't hear this from the Ukrainian side, and it's received with such disbelief And I combine it, of course, with this denazification, which is the other official reason for this special mission, to remove so-called Nazis in Ukraine, which really becomes more and more farcical the longer this war continues. I mean, there's no real basis for this accusation, I think, on the Russian side. Putin has needed some kind of excuse to mount this war, and none of the reasons really are comprehensible to the world at large. I think if you look back a few years, you could see there was some far-right extremists taking part in Ukrainian society. No one would really deny that. As there was in Russian society, and in fact in North America, we have such extremists as well. But they are peripheral to the political scene. None of them have ever got, I think, more than 10% in a national parliamentary election. And that was only on one occasion in 2012. And at the moment, they're invisible in the Ukrainian leadership structure. There are no neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian leadership, You could say that unequivocally. I'm not sure you could say exactly the same thing about the Russian leadership. But this is why the accusations just seem far-fetched. And Yuliya described, I think, quite accurately the broader picture, that you're looking at visions of what Russia is. And I would agree that we've gone back to the Russian Empire rather than the Soviet Union. I mean, a lot of the territory that's being claimed could only be claimed if you know the history of the Russian Empire, and then only for brief periods of that empire. So this is why I think it's unacceptable on a number of different levels.
Clément, est-ce que je peux ajouter quelques mots?
Oui, Dominique, rapidement. Puis après, je voulais vous interviewer sur, sur les raisons du conflit, de la décision de Poutine. Mais je vous écoute rapidement. Complétez.
Oui, évidemment, David a tout à fait raison que c'est très difficile pour tout le monde, et certainement pour les Occidentaux, à comprendre cette obsession de dénazification, de trouver des nazis, etc. en Ukraine. Il y a 2 points. Lorsqu'on regarde l'histoire, on a parlé beaucoup de l'Empire russe, donc si on remonte même à l'Empire russe, il y a cette très, très, très vieille tradition en Russie, et là, encore une fois, c'est exprimé ouvertement par Poutine, de considérer le nationalisme ukrainien. Quand on dit nationalisme ukrainien, ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire le sentiment d'être une nation distincte, distincte donc de la nation russe, et le sentiment, puisqu'on est une nation distincte, on a droit à notre État distinct, un État indépendant, donc l'État ukrainien. C'est ça le nationalisme, en fond. L'idée nationale, l'idée de considérer l'idée même de nationalisme ukrainien comme étant une fabrication de l'Occident, pas quelque chose de réel. C'est pour ça qu'on entend Poutine, c'est pas d'hier, ça fait 15-20 ans que Poutine nous dit périodiquement que la nation ukrainienne, c'est pas réel et que c'est pas un véritable État en Ukraine. Il le dit maintenant en envoyant son armée pour détruire ce qui n'est pas réel. Mais cette notion que l'idée même que les Ukrainiens ont un passé et donc une destinée commune différente des Russes, ça, c'est artificiel. Ça, c'est imposé par les Autrichiens au 19e siècle, par les Polonais au 20e siècle. Là, c'est les Américains. C'est toujours donc des agents de l'étranger. Ça, c'est le point numéro 1. Et 2, le lien avec le nazisme, entre guillemets, lorsque il a tenu, Poutine, il y a 2 semaines, son grand ralliement là, pour la réunification de la Crimée dans le stade Loujniki, avec le slogan « pour la paix sans le nazisme », qui semble encore une fois d'une absurdité totale, c'est de lier nationalisme ukrainien avec fascisme, qui s'appelle maintenant nazisme en Russie, mais depuis la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, le nazisme a toujours été appelé fascisme en Russie. Le fait que Poutine utilise nazisme maintenant, c'est pour essayer d'influencer l'opinion internationale. Le mot en Russie, c'est fascisme. Les Allemands, les nazis, c'était les fascistes. Les Ukrainiens nationalistes sont des fascistes. Alors, si tu es Ukrainien nationaliste, tu es anti-russe et tu es fasciste. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire être anti-russe? Ben, ça veut dire vouloir se joindre à l'OTAN, vouloir se joindre à l'Union européenne, vouloir prendre des décisions, finalement, qui ne sont pas les décisions de Moscou. Et puisque le nationalisme est fasciste, donc c'est nazi. que finalement, c'est un danger existentiel, un danger sécuritaire donc pour la Russie, et il faut utiliser l'armée pour l'extirper. Alors, ça donne une espèce de logique à ce qui nous semble complètement absurde, que finalement, Poutine a déclenché la guerre il y a un mois. Pourquoi? Ben pour détruire l'armée ukrainienne, donc l'État ukrainien, c'est ce qui a appelé la démilitarisation. Bon, ça ne fonctionne pas très bien, on va en parler. Et dénazifier l'Ukraine, ben ça voulait dire renverser le gouvernement, éliminer toute la classe politique, nationaliste entre guillemets, et mettre probablement des gens du Donbass, là, des républiques autoproclamées au pouvoir, donc des gens qui seraient pro-russes. Éliminer totalement toute cette idée et toute cette classe politique nationaliste. Mais ça aussi, ça ne fonctionne pas.
Merci, Dominique. Yuliya, if we want to be in the head of Putin, it's very hard. I mean, that's impossible. But if we want to justify or to explain his decision to invade Ukraine, it is because he belongs to a generation who feels real betrayed by those who organized the fall of USSR?
I've been reading about so many theories, you know, so to psychoanalyze Putin, there are several theories. So one is that what happened in 2014 with Euromaidan and the Revolution of Dignity, he took it very personally. It was like a slap on the face, and so that it was just a matter of time because it's all about revenge. So revenge, as they say, is the dish that is served cold, so they have been preparing this. It was not just one last-minute improvisation. This is one version that I've heard. Another version is, of course, this person is coming from the KGB school in St. Petersburg, in Leningrad at the time, that is considered to be one of the, in the times of Andropov, one of the most cruel and one of the most obsessive KGB schools in the country. So psychologically, he was formed there. What does it mean? It means that any kind of a compromise, it means that any kind of negotiation is a sign of dignity. So there is absolutely out of the question. It means that you dignify yourself if you follow, the path of diplomacy. So I think it has imprinted a lot on how he makes decisions, how he sees the other side, and the other side is always the enemy, and the enemy must be destroyed. So I mean, I'm really to be very right now maybe a little bit cynical here, but I'm astonished by the sudden reaction of the West. Oh my God, the guy is a maniac, etc. This is not the first time this is happening. We saw the second war in Chechnya and the kind of methods that were used. We saw the war in Georgia in 2008. We saw the repetitive use of chemical weapons and of poisons on the territory of the other. So there is a pattern. So it's not like from one day to another there's somebody who lost his head. So all of it was verified and personally commended by the person who is right now the president of Russia. So this was my very brief psychological portrait. And also, if you look at the latest press conferences, and the way of a very aggressive, there are two tactics. So you either attack, it's a very aggressive take on any question, or you completely dismiss the argument of the other party. So I remember what was very memorable for me, his exchange with, I think it was a journalist from the BBC, and he was in a very aggressive way. He was saying, are you thinking that we're stupid? Don't you know? Don't you think we don't know every step that the CIA takes on our territory, etc.? So we can add the third trait to the portrayal, which is paranoia. So there is a paranoia, and paranoia is also, this paranoid perception of the world is seen in everything, in how he communicates with his close circles and the bunker in which he lives, and everything else. So the paranoia of there being only two great powers, so it's either FSB and CIA and nothing in the middle, really matters, because everything else, they just move thanks to these two grand forces. So this is the picture.
Yes, this is the picture. David, Dominic told about, dethrone Zelensky and his government, as the first, or denazify as the first aim or goals of Putin. What about, to prevent Ukraine of future integration to NATO and UE, European Union? What do you think about that?
Well, I think Putin has described Ukraine joining NATO as one of his red lines, that this should never be allowed to happen. But in a number of ways, the European Union perhaps could be a long-term goal. I'm talking now as if the war had never taken place. Prior to the war, joining the European Union might be seen as a long-term goal of Ukraine. They became an associate member in 2014. But the prospects of full membership are still some way into the future. In terms of membership of NATO, I don't think it was an immediate prospect ever. Perhaps in 2008, NATO made an error when it suggested a membership action plan for Georgia that ended up with the Russian invasion there. But Ukraine joining NATO would require sort of unity among the NATO members about that happening. And that has never been the case. There are a number of countries that would not accept Ukraine as a member of NATO. So I think, Zelensky sort of come to this conclusion himself now. He's talking about Ukraine as a neutral, non-aligned country. And in the past, we've seen this kind of status work quite successfully. It worked with Finland. It worked during the Cold War with Austria. And Switzerland traditionally has been a neutral country as well. It is possible to be a neutral, non-aligned country and survive. But the difficulty is that Putin is treating Ukraine like one of his arms. This is part of us. This is something that you cannot chop up and take away and affiliate with something else. So I think it would be very hard for Ukraine as a neutral, non-aligned nation. I think it probably is the future it will take ultimately. But it would need security guarantees that are better than those it had back in 1994, when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons and the Russian Federation, the United States and Britain gave security guarantees to Ukraine not to change its borders and to protect it, all of which subsequently Russia has violated. So how do you ensure that Ukraine as a neutral nation can survive? And I think that's the key point. And if I could just add to that, I was talking to Dominique before we began today about the countries that have been advanced as possible guarantors of Ukrainian security in the future. Our country, Canada, was one of them, which, for me, is all nice and symbolic. But the fact is, militarily, we could not protect Ukraine. And I suspect that is the case for the other countries that were advanced as well. Turkey, for example, is a possibility. I think it would need to be something stronger than our countries. So I'll stop at that point.
Ok, thank you, David. On parlera évidemment bien sûr de la position turque qui peut jouer en effet un rôle important et majeur dans la relation et les négociations qui sont en cours, notamment concernant le statut de neutralité de l'Ukraine. Dominique, je voudrais qu'on fasse un point peut-être sur la situation militaire, qu'on en ait quelques mots actuels. On sait qu'après un mois de combats qui ont été effectivement très, très lourds, avec des conséquences sur les populations civiles ukrainiennes désastreuses, on voit bien notamment du côté de Mariupol, il y a des situations qui sont quand même très, très diverses, très hétérogènes en fonction des territoires, des villes, avec une stratégie russe qu'on ne comprend pas toujours. Le fait est que les armées, en tout cas, semblent stopper à certains endroits. Quelles sont les options militaires, Dominique, pour Poutine aujourd'hui, très concrètement, avec une armée qui semble parfois pas très bien préparée, très jeune, avec des contingents qui ne savaient pas où ils allaient, soi-disant mobilisés pour des exercices. Aujourd'hui, quelles sont les options militaires très concrètes pour Poutine avant de parler d'utilisation d'armes dites sales, s'il y en avait des propres, et éventuellement de l'option nucléaire?
Oui, une situation très complexe sur le terrain. Pour essayer de simplifier un peu, il faut penser à 3 fronts. Il y a le front du Nord, le front de l'Est et le front du Sud. Le front du Nord, c'est d'abord et avant tout, mais pas uniquement, celui qui mène à Kiev. Par la Biélorusse via Tchernobyl, comme on a vu dès le début de la guerre. Donc, c'est assez clair que la Russie croyait être capable de se rendre à Kiev de façon très rapide et de renverser le gouvernement. Évidemment, ça ne s'est pas produit. Ils n'ont pas été aussi capables d'encercler la ville de Kiev, ce qui est très important d'un point de vue militaire, parce que ça signifie que l'approvisionnement militaire considérable et qui va en s'accroissant, surtout de la part des États-Unis, via l'OTAN, les pays de l'OTAN. Là, on parle des missiles anti-chars, des missiles anti-aviation, etc., des munitions. Ça veut dire que ce corridor-là, ce passage, surtout depuis la Pologne vers Kiev, ça va continuer, puisque on voit sur le terrain ce matin, il y avait eu l'annonce, il faut toujours être sceptique lorsqu'il y a des annonces russes, de leur véracité, qu'effectivement, il semble y avoir un certain retrait des troupes russes autour de Kiev, plus vers le nord. Il y a des localités qui ont été reprises par l'armée ukrainienne. Donc, point numéro 1, l'encerclement et surtout pas, finalement, la chute de Kiev, là, c'est militairement, c'est plus possible pour la Russie. Ça, c'est sur le front nord. Le front sud, c'est le seul front où il y avait eu, dès le départ, des avancées territoriales importantes. On a parlé beaucoup de la province de Kherson, qui se trouve, si vous regardez une carte, qui se trouve être tout juste au nord de la Crimée. C'est comme le lien de passage terrestre entre la péninsule de la Crimée et puis, bon, le continent ukrainien, enfin, pas le continent, mais le territoire continental ukrainien, là, vers l'est. Alors, Kherson est effectivement tombé, en tout cas la ville, c'est pas très clair si toute la province est vraiment contrôlée par la Russie. Et puis là, il y a eu une tentative qui se poursuit de lier donc la Crimée via Kherson, via certaines localités de la province de Zaporizhia vers le Donbass, d'où l'importance de Mariupol. Et ça, l'armée ukrainienne, évidemment, la ville de Mariupol n'est toujours pas tombée, ou en tout cas, on a des informations contradictoires. Évidemment, c'est une catastrophe humanitaire, tout le monde le sait. Mais la Russie a été incapable de poursuivre sa conquête du sud de l'autre côté, vers Mykolaïev et surtout Audencia. Ça a été un échec, mais Mykolaïev, en dépit de tous les bombardements, a tenu le coup, donc Audencia n'a pas été attaqué. Alors, il semble encore une fois y avoir une position assez statique là, des forces russes, mais ils ont tout de même conquéri le territoire ukrainien. Lorsqu'on parlait de négociations, là, il y a une occupation russe au sud. Et puis là, ce qui nous mène au front de l'Est, ça c'est le front du Donbass. Alors, il faut se rappeler que la guerre en Ukraine, évidemment, n'est pas appelée une guerre par la Russie, c'est même un crime là, de prononcer le mot, passible de 15 ans de prison, mais une opération militaire pour la protection du Donbass. L'idée étant, c'était un mensonge monstrueux, que l'armée ukrainienne attaquait les civils du Donbass et commettait un génocide, alors qu'il n'y avait aucune attaque contre les civils. En fait, il n'y avait aucune attaque, point, depuis 8 ans, sinon une situation de guerre de tranchées assez loin des civils, en fait, dans le Donbass. La Russie a reconnu, 2 jours avant le déclenchement de la guerre, donc Poutine a reconnu comme étant indépendants les républiques autoproclamées du Donbass. Mais il faut comprendre ou se rappeler que géographiquement, ces 2 républiques autoproclamées, la République populaire de Donetsk et de Luhansk, ne constituent géographiquement que le tiers du Donbass. D'où l'importance de Mariupol, qui était la grande ville qui était restée du côté ukrainien depuis 1914, et plein d'autres territoires et d'autres villes qui sont actuellement bombardées. Donc, l'opération militaire à l'Est, c'est la conquête de tout le Donbass. Mais encore une fois, la Russie se heurte à une résistance ukrainienne très forte. Et comme il y a résistance ukrainienne très forte, c'est l'arme de la terreur, c'est le bombardement des villes. Ils ont détruit 2 villes de taille petite et moyenne le long de la frontière du Donbass, détruites à 80%. Ils ont détruit Mariupol, qui est une ville de taille assez considérable, et ils cherchent finalement non seulement à conquérir tout le Donbass, mais à faire le pont entre le sud et le nord, ce qui couperait les armées, parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'armées ukrainiennes actuellement sur le front du Donbass, parce que c'était là où la guerre avait lieu depuis 8 ans. Le danger d'encerclement de ces troupes-là. Donc, il y a un danger, mais la réalité, c'est que l'armée ukrainienne, tient le coup militairement. Il y a des pertes considérables du côté russe ou pro-russe, parce que là, lorsqu'on parle du Donbass, il faut dire aussi pro-russe pour les républiques autoproclamées de 2014. Alors voilà la situation sur le terrain, telle que je la comprends.
As Dominic say, Yuliya, Ukrainian army can resist to the pressure of Russian army, and military authorities, military said, we don't need tactics, we don't need advices, we just need weapons. As the Zelensky president told, I mean, I don't need a taxi, I just need some planes, some military planes, some weapons. Could international aid could be a game changer, a turning point for Ukrainian army, do you think?
Well, I mean, absolutely. There is, I think, more and more voices here in the West supporting more generous military help to Ukraine. So, and for example, Germany, until recently, there was a campaign, and there were some, you saw the debates in the German parliament, right? So they were helping by just sending the helmets, which is really a bit of a joke, and I think a huge moral failure. So right now there is a clear need, okay, you don't want to close the sky, you need to provide the weapons that would allow Ukrainians to defend themselves against the barbaric Russian tactics of bombarding the cities. This is what they did during the First and the Second Chechen War. I was listening to an interview yesterday. There was a Russian general who is now dead, and Grozny was under siege, just like Mariupol, for longer than a month. Grozny is the capital of the Chechen Republic. And he was told during the meeting of the commanders that they cannot enter the city because there are snipers, there are soldiers, and the people defending the city shooting from the windows. And what his reply was, okay, so make sure that there are no windows to shoot from. And this is exactly what they did in Mariupol. So the usage of, there were already several evidences of Russia using the rockets that cannot be used in the warfare. So there is documented cases of the banned weapons being used in the warfare done by Russia. And the tactics is this: you bombard the place, you annihilate any kind of a possibility of resistance, and then you enter the place with the tanks. So all of this was very easy to predict, and there are many military journalists who know the history of how Russia launches its wars, that were predicting this was going to happen. So you need to act very quickly. You need to give them the anti-missile system. You need to give them you know, the types of the offensive weapons, something that would allow them effectively to intercept the launches of the rockets, of the missiles shot by Russia. There is, again, it's not a coincidence why Zelensky made several appeals to Israel, because Israel has one of the strongest air defense systems, which is called the I forgot the name, and the dome. Oh, sorry, the Iron Dome. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So, but absolutely, I think if and it also explains this emotional appeal of the Ukrainian people and of the Ukrainian president, so that you know that inevitably the casualties are going to be enormous if bombardments will continue. So how many morally are you willing to accept? What kind of number of victims is morally acceptable to the West before they change their mode of acting in terms of the provision of the the weapons.
Yeah, thank you, Yuliya. David, I mean, we are on the point now, maybe on a turning point. As I said, I mean, could the Russian army and the Russian power in Moscow, as I say, I mean, as we can say, Putin, consider at some stage of the conflict we are about, I mean, to go in a few days or in a few weeks of the conflict to use, I mean, biological and chemical weapons. Do you think that that's an option for Putin?
It's an option, but I think this would be a more of a last resort, because at the moment the damage is being done by the weapons available. It's the ground forces, the Russian ground forces, that are failing in this war, and they've given a very stark example of the state of the Russian army, which, you know, maybe many people expected it to be a very efficient sort of operation. And the destruction is being caused, Ukraine is being effectively depopulated. I mean, you're looking at about 10 million people now as either internal or external refugees. So I think in this respect, this is probably what Putin was trying to achieve: destruction and ensuring that Ukraine would not be able to be effectively rise up as a state again anytime in the near future. Chemical weapons would likely prompt Western states finally to give Ukrainians the sort of weapons that would be more effective against the airstrikes or against Russian tanks. And I think that would be the logical way to continue, you know. But at the same time, Russia is not, by any standards, economically a great power. And this is something I think needs to be emphasized. We're talking about a country that's got a relatively small economy that at the moment is doing a little better than in the past because of the high prices for Russian oil and gas worldwide. But in the long term, it is going to be dependent on those kind of resources to continue. The economy then is about the same size as Italy's economy. And if you could consider, you know, Italy carrying out a war of this scale, I mean, it's simply inconceivable. Russia can perhaps do it for a time, but I don't think it can do it indefinitely. And I think at some point, Russia will need to come forward. It will need to trade with European partners. So rather than going, I think, to chemical weapons, or even, as they've sometimes said, nuclear weapon, using a nuclear weapon, I think it's more likely that Russia will need to come to some kind of terms at some point. Russia's incurred a lot of losses as well, and it cannot keep replenishing the troops that are in the field. It's put a big army in there, a huge army in Ukraine. And probably one of the reasons why Putin is agreeing to talks now is that it's going to take some time for new recruits to that army to get trained before they go out into the battlefield. So I think that's where Russia is. It's not in a great place, but I doubt that they would resort to chemical weapons.
Thank you, David. Dominique, on parle évidemment de l'utilisation probable ou potentielle de ces armes chimiques ou biologiques. Est-ce que la question de l'arme nucléaire, c'est une menace, c'est un sujet uniquement de négociation et qui est inscrit pleinement dans l'histoire et depuis la guerre froide jusqu'à aujourd'hui? Est-ce que potentiellement il y a une réelle menace, et évidemment ce qui inquiète notamment les Européens, les pays frontaliers, d'une utilisation d'une arme nucléaire et peut-être de manière chirurgicale très très localisée sur un territoire de l'Ukraine?
Écoutez, depuis un mois, je pense qu'on est entré dans une zone où plus rien n'est impossible, plus rien n'est implausible. Une guerre d'agression comme les Ukrainiens le vivent là, depuis un mois, c'était justement dans le registre de l'impossible depuis la fin de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. Sur le sol européen, là, j'entends, mais c'est la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, le cœur, évidemment, a été sur le sol européen. Alors, vous avez effectivement Poutine et des représentants du gouvernement russe qui très régulièrement brandissent la menace du nucléaire dans le but assez avéré d'intimider finalement les puissances occidentales. pour chercher à faire fléchir peut-être leur détermination à soutenir l'Ukraine. Est-ce que le recours à ces armes est possible? Comme je viens de le dire, rien malheureusement ne peut être balayé du revers de la main, comme jamais ils feront ça, parce que ça va être suicidaire, il va y avoir une riposte terrible et tout. Mais évidemment, quand on commence à jouer avec le feu, ça peut déraper aussi. Il pourrait y avoir malheureusement avant même de passer au nucléaire, on voit qu'il y a l'utilisation de missiles, cette fois de très haute précision, qui sont dirigés très proche de la frontière polonaise et donc de la frontière de l'OTAN. On parle à une dizaine, une vingtaine de kilomètres. On l'a vu encore en fin de semaine. On le voit très régulièrement. S'il fallait qu'un missile, finalement, tombe peut-être par erreur du mauvais côté de la frontière, qui mène à une escalade, qui mène ensuite à, qui sait, qui force Poutine à requérir au type d'armes de destruction massive dont on parle. Malheureusement, tout ça, c'est pas impossible. C'est pas impossible. Mais il faut rester très sobre devant une telle possibilité. D'où, quant à moi, là, on va parler des négociations. J'imagine dans la dernière demi-heure, il semble que les négociations peuvent mener à quelque chose si la position ukrainienne est en réalité renforcée sur le terrain. C'est la seule façon qu'on puisse venir à une espèce de rééquilibrage des forces qui mènerait peut-être à une déescalade de la situation.
Merci, Dominique. Effectivement, on va parler. We're going to talk about negotiation and solution. But just before, I wanted to talk about economic situation of Ukraine with you, Yuliya. Since the annexion of Crimea by Russia in 2014, the Ukraine has largely opened up to European and Asian market, because before it was only focused with Russia. And in 2021, activity posted a GDP of 5.9% at dynamic that could continue this year and 2023. But I mean, now, how is the Ukrainian economic? Is it completely collapsed now with after a war? After a month, just a month?
No, I don't think it has collapsed. Of course, there are a lot of infrastructural objects that have been destroyed. So today, I think it was announced for the first time that they're talking about €500 billion of economic losses because of the war. It has been announced by the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine. So, but of course, Ukraine was a very important player in a number of the global markets. So, you already probably know this is one of the biggest exporters of wheat. It's extremely important for the Middle East and for Northern Africa. So, countries like Egypt, 80% of its wheat and its flour comes from Ukraine. So it is one of the most important exporters of girasol oil, and during the times of the Soviet Union, this was considered to be the main producer of grain, any kind of grain. So but on the other hand, you have a very well-developed industrial complex. So one of the leading producers of steel, oil refineries, etc. And Ukraine was also quite important for China in its attempt to build this vision of the Silk Road and Belt Project. So to connect, to develop and to put in place the new transit routes from China to the European Union. This is why it made Chinese very uneasy what happened, especially given the situation in Belarus. That was important transit route as well. So being politically unstable and also, as we see right now, complicit in the war. So yes, we cannot underestimate the significance that the war in Ukraine will have on the world economy, on the global economy. We're talking about biggest country in Europe. We're talking about a very important player, and there are a number of markets, and already there are some estimates by the World Bank that this is going to see the rise in the prices for the basic goods up to 20-25%, because the question then becomes what will need to be done in order to help Ukraine restore its economy, right? So we can already predict the amount of financial aid that it would require. We can already envision a kind of the Marshall Plan. This is on the one hand, but on the other hand, this created a huge disruption in one of the most important global markets, which is the energy market. So, and right now there are all these plans that have been announced how to lower the dependence on Russian gas and oil, but even within the European Union, it's very difficult to reach the agreement. There is an agreement, well, at least rhetorically, but we can see right now, for example, there is an open conflict between Spain and some other European Union countries that say that they want to change the way that the prices have been regulated, energy prices have been regulated in the European Union, because they feel that some countries like Spain and Portugal become unfairly disadvantaged. They don't have any dependence on, for example, Russian gas, but nevertheless, and Russian oil, but nevertheless, right now the transport industry of Spain has been really affected by the situation. So there were strikes. I was in Spain last week. Everything was paralyzed. There are shortages in the shops because the transport sector exposed its vulnerability. So right now, Spain, why there was this conflict? Because Spain right now wants to get a kind, and Portugal, they want to have a more leeway and more political tools to influence the pricing mechanisms on the Spanish energy market. So absolutely, it's right now we can do and we can offer some very, very rough estimates, but we can already predict inflation. We can already predict that this is going to be, as they say, a perfect storm if you put on the top of it the economic consequences of everything that has been done during the pandemic.
Yeah, the economic consequence and the damage in the, I mean, collateral damage in the world. David, I mean, let's talk about, I mean, the sanction against Russia. Is there a risk, I mean, on the European Union economy or countries? Which countries, I mean, are specified and most directly weakened by this conflict among you?
Well,
we talk about Spain, but Italy, but I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think most obvious one is Germany, because Germany has not only been heavily dependent on Russian gas, but has just completed its Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Greifswald and Russia directly under the sea. And this would have provided gas to about 26 million German homes almost instantly. And this was a project that's taken some time. And, you know, it's a Russian project, really, that it has the goal, to some extent, of avoiding the gas pipeline through Ukraine, you know, to cut out Ukraine from the equation and to send the gas directly to Germany. And this has been suspended. And, of course, this has an immediate impact on the German economy. It may mean, for example, rethinking nuclear power. You know, nuclear power, which obviously you have in large numbers in France, means that France is more or less immune to any problems with Russian energy supplies. Slovakia is another country that's really very dependent on Russian gas. Hungary traditionally has been dependent as well. So these are the countries that will be immediately affected. And the question then is, you know, what are the alternative resources? Do countries have other resources to which they could turn? Or do they have other parties from which they could get oil and gas? Well, oil and gas, of course, is produced widely in a number of countries, from Saudi Arabia to Venezuela to Canada. And in theory, you could, over time, develop alternative supplies. But I think more logically would be a solution where, you know, Russia ends this war and returns to the world economy. In other words, sort of a reset to go back to where we were before. And I don't think, in some respects, it seems that there is no going back personally for the Russian leadership, this particular Russian leadership. You know, I cannot see any future for Russia in which Vladimir Putin would be an acceptable leader for Russia's partners. And that is something Russians will have to deal with at some point. In terms of the sanctions that have taken place against Russia, they will have enormous impact, but they may take some time. And there are always, with sanctions, there are always loopholes. For example, I read the other day about the McDonald's independent outlets, so-called, that did not leave Russia when the other outlets left, so that today you can go to a railroad station in Moscow and you can still get a McDonald's burger. Perhaps a trite example, but there are always exceptions, I think, when you have these blanket pullouts of companies from Russia. But overall, I would say the impact will be quite devastating. We've seen already the Russian ruble devalue considerably. The Russian stock exchange fell dramatically and is only being stabilized by the direct intervention of the Russian government, which means that Russian lending rates have increased to about 25%. So this is an economy in real trouble, and we're only 1 month into the war. So I think sanctions will have a long-term influence. And in terms of the countries affected, Central Europe in particular, and Germany, first and foremost.
Thank you, David. Dominique, on le comprend bien, évidemment, des conséquences économiques pour l'ensemble de la planète, et évidemment par capillarité et ces relations très fortes que la Russie nouait avec notamment l'Allemagne, si on doit parler de la zone Europe. Dominique, j'aimerais qu'on parle aussi évidemment des négociations. On vous donnera la parole dans quelques instants, vous lèverez la main et puis on vous distribuera les micros pour que vous puissiez interpeller directement nos grands témoins. Je voudrais qu'on parle évidemment de ce qui est en train de se jouer en termes de négociations et de ce que peuvent jouer les grandes institutions. Je pense notamment, en tout cas au démarrage, et un peu naturellement à la place des Nations Unies. On la sent quand même encore une fois très, très fragile, un petit peu à l'image de la Société des Nations qui avait pas su empêcher la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. On a l'impression ici que, évidemment, avec le blocage des votes et des membres permanents qui ne sont pas favorables à sanctionner la Russie, je pense notamment à la position de la Chine, parfois très ambiguë et d'autres fois plus claire dans son soutien à Moscou. Est-ce que, finalement, les Nations Unies sont le bon interlocuteur aujourd'hui pour aller vers la paix, ou en tout cas, à tout le moins, la fin du conflit en Ukraine?
Non, sur la résolution politique du conflit, malheureusement, les Nations Unies ne peuvent pas jouer un rôle direct, justement pour les raisons que vous venez d'invoquer, parce que le Conseil de sécurité, évidemment, le conflit implique un membre avec veto du Conseil de sécurité, c'est-à-dire la Russie, et puis la Chine, généralement, appuie passivement la position russe en s'abstenant, donc c'est déjà 2 votes sur 5 qu'on n'a pas. Évidemment, les Nations Unies jouent un rôle humanitaire et seront peut-être appelés à jouer un rôle encore plus grand sur le front humanitaire, peut-être si jamais on en vient à une résolution avec des troupes de paix, mais on n'est vraiment pas... c'est encore loin à l'horizon. Là, on parle justement de négociations qui ont lieu en Turquie. C'est déjà une avancée plutôt que de le faire au Biélorusse, qui est en fait maintenant partie prenante du conflit. Mais il y a 2 problèmes de fond là, qui vont être très, très, très difficiles à résoudre. Et peut-être, puisque vous parlez d'interlocuteurs, je crois qu'en fait, et je ne dis pas ça parce que là, j'interviens dans un événement sur le sol français, mais je pense que la France doit et va jouer un rôle majeur de médiation. Comme elle a tenté de le faire depuis 8 ans avec l'Allemagne, avec les fameux accords de Minsk, qui ont finalement débouché, frappé un mur là, en février 2022. Après tout, le président Macron est particulièrement le seul dirigeant d'une grande puissance qui converse régulièrement avec M. Poutine. Il joue presque le rôle d'un thérapeute. Là. Au moins, il laisse Poutine parler, c'est toujours ça. C'est toujours un canal qui reste ouvert. Donc, brièvement, puisque c'est très compliqué, le problème de fond, c'est sur 2 volets. Il y a le problème territorial. Quand on dit le problème territorial, ce n'est pas seulement la demande répétée par la Russie de reconnaître la Crimée et le Donbass, que l'Ukraine accepte finalement sa propre partition, mais J'ai essayé de l'expliquer précédemment lorsque vous m'avez demandé de faire une espèce de rapport sur la situation du front ou des fronts sur le terrain. C'est que lorsque la Russie parle du Donbass, elle parle de tout le Donbass. Donc, le consensus territorial actuellement, bon, évidemment, il y a d'autres zones qui sont occupées, là, dans le sud et dans le nord, mais le problème majeur du Donbass, c'est que la Russie demande la reconnaissance de tout le Donbass. Donc, Mariupol. Donc, la capitulation de Mariupol, que Mariupol, finalement, ne fasse plus partie de l'Ukraine. Ça, le gouvernement ukrainien, évidemment, ne l'accepte pas et ne l'acceptera pas. Ça, c'est la première, c'est quoi l'expression? Le premier blocage des négociations. Et le deuxième, évidemment, le mot neutralité semble nous mener vers un début de résolution. Et David, évidemment, a tout à fait raison de mentionner historiquement l'exemple de la Finlande, de l'Autriche. Sauf que la Finlande et l'Autriche, évidemment, ont aussi des armées, et des armées qui ont été, qui sont développées pas en autarcie, mais en collaboration avec les armées de l'OTAN aussi, sans faire partie de l'OTAN. La question de sécurité, pour faire court, c'est que l'Ukraine demande en fait que puisque l'OTAN, puisqu'elle ne peut pas devenir membre de l'OTAN et qu'elle ne fait pas partie de l'OTAN actuellement, donc il ne peut pas y avoir une zone d'exclusion militaire pour empêcher les bombardements des villes. Ben à ce moment-là, l'Ukraine doit développer sa propre zone d'exclusion militaire. Elle va avoir besoin d'avions, il va avoir besoin d'encore plus de matériel anti-char, mais aussi, on discute de plus en plus, anti-navires de guerre, pour faire en sorte qu'une guerre d'agression, comme elle le subit depuis un mois, et une guerre de terreur, c'est-à-dire le bombardement des villes, que ça soit plus possible, même militairement, sans faire partie de l'OTAN. C'est mon interprétation des fameuses garanties de sécurité que l'Ukraine demande. D'accord, les troupes de l'OTAN, l'armée française viendra pas en Ukraine pour se battre contre la Russie avec les Ukrainiens. Ça n'arrivera pas. Ça n'arrive pas maintenant, puis ça n'arrivera pas. Mais donnez-nous les moyens pour qu'on puisse justement se défendre contre toute possibilité ultérieure d'attaque russe. Alors, évidemment que c'est un consensus très majeur dans les négociations, mais c'est ce qui se discute sur la table actuellement.
Merci Dominique. Avant de vous donner la parole très très rapidement, Yuliya, we talk about those who can play a role in that kind of a negotiation. What about China? When we know that it becomes the first leading trading partner for Ukraine recently, can it play a role? I mean, with economic motives.
So I don't think so. I don't think that they have clearly demonstrated where their sympathies are, and I think they also have certain things that they want to achieve economically in terms of their activities in Siberia. So I think in this sense also Ukraine won't be willing to accept China as a negotiator. I agree with Dominic that, or was it David who said that the Turkey seems like a much better yes, it was David. So it was Canada, the country that was a grantor when Ukraine had the second largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. So right now, if you really want the new guarantees, you want to make sure that this is going to be a credible commitment of somebody whose military is strong enough to intervene. So I don't think China right now, geopolitically and with their own geopolitical tensions and the Chinese Southern Sea, they're in the situation to be even considered. So I don't think so.
Yeah, thank you, Yuliya. So let's start the Q&A session. Just hands up, like you. We're gonna give you a mic. If you could introduce yourself, please, and just ask any of our special guests tonight. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, thank you. So, my name is Constantin. I come from Romania. I work at Audencia. Can you hear me, Dominic and David?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
David hears you. Yeah, sure.
So perfect. So, I'm from Romania. I was saying, and we are watching this conflict, and we have some ideas about what's happened. Well, everybody has their own opinion on the conflict, but what I would like to ask or to submit to your inquiry is the following. Well, I understand there's a shortage of gas in Europe, and there are crises that are related to the fact that the gas is provided by Russia. But if I understood correctly, Russia did not stop the gas to come to Europe. So why is there a gas crisis when Russia still delivers gas to Europe? And from what I understand, is that the arm industry is actually the one that is winning from all of this war, and especially Canada and America that are the main suppliers of war. Thus, from my side, is that these countries that deliver and provide war arm industry to countries have a big interest to keep this conflict going on.
Thank you very much for your questions. David, can you answer him, please? And maybe after Dominique or Yuliya as free. Feel free. David.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. I would say, first of all, that the energy crisis that we're describing is maybe something that is more long-term than now. I mean, I was talking about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is not operating, but was due to start right at the time the war began. And this is something that the Germans and the Russians have negotiated for a long time. And one of the concerns was that this pipeline was negotiated generally outside the realm of the European Union, in that it was a bilateral agreement between Russia and Germany. And there have been close economic ties regarding Gazprom between the two countries for some time now, and Germans have played a role even in the board of directors of Gazprom in the past. So that is the first thing. The second is that if gas is reaching Europe right now, and in fact, I'm sitting here in Western Canada, about as far away as I could possibly be, so I couldn't tell you whether it is or not. But the fact is, if the gas is coming through Ukraine, then the chances of supply being disrupted, I would think, are fairly high. The gas pipeline that runs through Biélorussie, on the other hand, is now completely Russian-controlled and Russian-owned, and that would probably be a more reliable source. But in the past, only about 20% of gas that's coming to Europe has come through that particular pipeline. So if Ukraine has effectively control of the pipeline, they can cut off the gas supply, or it could be the result of a missile, or anything could happen to that gas supply. In terms of supplying weapons, I mean, what Canada, United States is doing is responding to the request of Ukrainians for help. I mean, these Ukrainians on their own, with the weapons that they have, cannot resist the invasion. Canada and Ukraine have been close allies. We have obviously a large Ukrainian population here that goes back in terms of settlement about 130 years. So naturally, Ukrainians turned to Canada. We were also only the second country in the world to recognize Ukraine as an independent state. So it's a response, I think, from the Liberal government to a request for help. This is not some kind of inside or mafia-style operation where we're sending weapons all the way around the world. We simply don't have that degree of weapons. I cannot speak for our friends down south. What United States does is United States concern. But United States generally, I would say that the comments made by the President of the United States about the war so far have not actually helped a great deal. They've been more expressed based on emotions than anything that's logical, which is perhaps understandable. But the United States obviously could really step up weapons if it chose to do so. It's not sent a great number of lethal weapons to Ukraine today. So hope that answered the question, at least partially.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for your answer. We've got another question from remote, and those who follow us by remote, thank you for being with us too. We've got a question maybe for you, Dominique, pour vous, Dominique, will the outcome of this conflict lead to a sort of Ukrainian Nuremberg trial, or is a normalization of relation possible? And, I mean, in which form, in what form? Est-ce qu'on va vers une issue de procès à la Nuremberg, ou est-ce qu'on va vers une normalisation finalement des relations, ou une autre forme de relation entre ces pays, entre les pays?
Est-ce que je réponds en français ou en anglais si la question est en anglais?
Maybe in English, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem. Well, listen, the analogy of the Nuremberg trial goes so far as there are limits to it, obviously. Russia is not about to be invaded and be put in a situation of unconditional surrender like Germany in 1945, where then the whole leadership and Putin first would be put on trial. Of course, it's not happening. But there might be initiatives, both at the level of the International Criminal Court or in some parallel fashion, being discussed to at least morally kind of bring Russia to accountability for its crimes. I mean, we've been witnessing the terror bombing of cities. Well, first there is the crimes against peace. It's a war of aggression with the stated aim of destroying a sovereign state, but also the way the war has been conducted. Mariupol being the most visible example, but the pattern is very clear. It's every single city that is being partly encircled by, at least partly encircled by the Russian army has been terror bombed. I mean, cities that the general audience knows less, but in the north, Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, I mentioned cities in Donbass, Mariupol, Mykolaiv, and it's systematic. And Kiev, to some extent, particularly in the suburbs of Kiev. But the second part of the question in terms of normalization, if we do get, and we all hope that we will get soon enough, although we have to be very, very prudent and cautious in our expectations, damped, to a political solution, at least a temporary political solution. That necessarily requires a certain degree of normalization, like we're witnessing right now. There are negotiations taking place in Turkey between representatives of the Russian state, therefore delegated by Putin, since he is the all-powerful leader, and representatives of the Ukrainian state. Now, the extent to which the top leadership, those who are sanctioned, and pretty much they're all sanctions, including President Putin, the extent to which going forward relations will become quote-unquote normalized, I will only say this. I understand the media has made a huge deal about what Biden said in Poland over the weekend about this man cannot stay in power.
I mean, yeah.
You know, regime change, etc. It was not about regime change, of course, because the United States has no intention of actually sending a commando in Moscow to overthrow Putin. It's not happening. There is no direct war between NATO and let alone the United States and Russia. But to have, to be in a position when one man has absolute power with no checks and balances of any kind right now in Russia, we know that, no independent media, and of course no parliament, that's been happening for quite a while, but also not even the equivalent of the old Politburo that could actually remove Nikita Khrushchev in 1963 and replace him with, Brezhnev back then. This notion of collective leadership. Russia has not known that kind of personalized power since Stalin, literally. I think that situation is inherently unstable for the international order, to have that kind of arbitrarily absolute power in the hands of one man. And we've seen the result in the last month, because there is mounting evidence that no one, even among his very officially close guard and people, even knew that they would go to full-scale war. It was taken basically by one man. So I doubt that we can then normalize a situation that is inherently and profoundly unstable. So in that sense, regime changes, that Russia will have to be in a situation at some point where it may remain an authoritarian system that we don't like in the West in terms of values and so forth, but not that kind of system that is, again, structurally now unstable because one man is unchecked.
Thank you, Dominique. Thank you very much for your answer. Another question from the audience there. Thank you very much for your question. Just introduce yourself, please, and ask your question.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I'm Benjamin, professor in entrepreneurship at Audencia. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, Yuliya, for this exciting discussion. I just have a question. You know, when we see during the last few years, the Donbass was a very local conflict, and the Ukrainian faced against pro-Russian soldiers. Can we imagine, I know we don't have a crystal magic ball, you know, but in a few months, can we imagine some United Nations soldiers, peacekeepers at the, Ukrainian borders, to make the difference? You know, we can imagine to try to keep peace. We can imagine if peace is going soon between Russians and Ukrainians.
Thank you. Your question is for Yuliya or anyone who wants to answer? What about you? Yes,
it's a good question. So on the subject of Donbass, if I'm not mistaken, Ukrainian authorities, they asked for the mission to be placed there six times in the Security Council, and 6 times it was rejected by Russia because politically this was beneficial to the Russian authorities to maintain conflict there. And, this is a threat that has been fabricated on purpose to be used to justify the invasion later on. So no surprises that they were rejecting it in the Security Council. Scholz, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday said that he was against the idea of bringing the Peace Corps into Ukraine, and a lot of Ukrainians and Ukrainian politicians are against it as well because it means we need to envision a long-term conflict. So it doesn't mean a resolution at present, but somehow it's already a scenario that can be extremely problematic. So this is going to be an ongoing war. So I don't think this is going to be something that the Ukrainian side will accept. But maybe there are some other opinions here.
Thank you, Yuliya. Gentlemen, you want to complete?
Well, I can say something.
David, shortly, please. Thank you.
Yeah, basically,
in a few words,
I agree with Yuliya. I think there are limitations to what the UN can do, and the UN itself has been shown during this war to be completely ineffective to date, largely because of the makeup of the Security Council. You would need a change in the structure of the whole Security Council, I think, to reach a solution in which the UN could play a viable role.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, David. Dominique, peut-être juste pour terminer, peut-être une dernière question, s'il y en a dans la salle. Sinon, moi, j'en avais une pour vous, Dominique. On a parlé évidemment des pays et des conséquences pour les pays qui sont voisins à l'Ukraine. Si Poutine réussissait, il faut s'entendre sur la définition de réussite, mais s'il réussissait à envahir, en tout cas dans une première intention, l'Ukraine, est-ce qu'il y a un risque d'ambition plus forte et plus éloignée pour les pays voisins? Je pense notamment à la Géorgie, à la Moldavie, qui se sentent directement menacés avant qu'on parle de la Pologne ou d'un accident de frontière ou de balistique que vous évoquiez tout à l'heure. Mais est-ce qu'il y a un risque pour ces pays voisins?
Je pense que c'est évident. Dans le cas de la Géorgie, je pense que la Géorgie, avec ce qui est arrivé depuis 2008, le gouvernement géorgien, comment dirais-je, a pris ses distances par rapport à une position plus radicalement anti-Russie. Alors peut-être que dans l'immédiat, il y a un peu moins grand risque. Le Moldova, c'est clair. Que si il faut placer aussi, même à très court terme, la guerre d'agression en Ukraine dans son contexte géographique, c'est-à-dire, évidemment, David en sait beaucoup plus que moi là, sur le Biélorusse, mais le Biélorusse est devenu depuis un an le vassal la Russie. Ce n'était pas le cas depuis 20 ans. Le Biélorusse gardait sa distance, mais comme le président est devenu un président illégitime à la suite d'élections truquées qui ont mené à des manifestations pendant des mois, et puis Loukachenko a demandé une aide sécuritaire à la Russie, et en échange, essentiellement, c'est un homme qui est brisé maintenant, qui n'est que le valet de Poutine. Et on a vu quelque chose un peu moins clair, ce qui est arrivé au Kazakhstan en janvier, mais le gouvernement actuel du Kazakhstan est beaucoup plus dépendant de la Russie qu'il ne l'était même il y a un an. Et donc, il y a cette tendance très lourde de chercher essentiellement à briser, entre guillemets, les gouvernements des ex-républiques. Alors, la Moldavie serait la prochaine sur la liste, sauf que là, il y a l'enlisement en Ukraine. Alors, peut-être que les plans à court terme vont commencer à changer du côté russe.
Merci beaucoup, Dominique. Yuliya SHYMKO, David Marple et Dominique AREL. We can applaud them because, I mean, yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much to you for your attention, for your participation, and see you soon. And yes, thank you, David.
You so much.
Thank you, Dominique. It was a great pleasure to talk each other. I mean, for this conference, and thank you very much, Yuliya.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good evening. See you soon. See you. Bye.
Gloire à l'Ukraine.
Yeah.
À bientôt.
À bientôt. Au revoir, Dominique.
Merci.
Bye bye, David.